morning, everybody. Mr. John. We're going to sing a song, which we've sung before, Center My Life. It's a great song, but it really fits the lesson well, because the lesson is going to be about who do we believe? Do we believe God and His Word, or do we believe people that can make mistakes and sometimes lie to us? What do we center our life on? And we're going to center our life on Jesus and on God's Word. So let's sing that now, and then we'll come back for our lesson. Song, Center My Life on Your Word. We have learned some wonderful, wonderful truths about creation week since we started back to Genesis. that very special time, creation week, never been duplicated, when Elohim, the triune God, called into existence all space, all matter, and he started time. He fashioned and formed the hydrosphere, that's all the watery parts of the earth. The atmosphere, that's the water in the clouds above the earth. He fashioned and formed stars and galaxies. Then he did the lithosphere, that's the solid ground and the land. And then he covered that with the plant biosphere, all the plants that grow and provide us food. And finally, he created the living creatures of the sea and the air and the land. And when all of that was done, on day 6, God created Adam and Eve in the image of God. And he charged them with caring for this planet and for populating the planet, filling the planet, because that's what God created the earth to be filled, to be inhabited by people who worship him. And God did it all in just 6 24-hour days, 24-hour time periods, and he rested on the 7th. And last week we learned that's why we have a 7-day week. Now, a natural question to ask is, when did God do this mighty work of creation? How long ago did God create dinosaurs, and did God create Adam and Eve, men and women? Well, God didn't give us a time stamp. Do you know that when you take a picture on your cell phone, like moms and dads do, or maybe you've got a cell phone, it's got a time stamp on it. If you go back and look, it can tell you exactly when you took the picture. But God didn't give us a time stamp on creation. He didn't say it was done 10,000 years ago. And I'm glad he didn't give us a time stamp, because whatever time stamp he gave would go out of date as we go further along the time. But God gave us something much, much better than a time stamp. He did. He gave us a list of names and ages of people who lived on the earth so that we could actually add and see how long ago the earth was created. If you look at Genesis chapters 5 and Genesis chapter 11, and Chuck's going to show a slide now about these very chapters, you're going to see the names of the patriarchs from Adam all the way to Abraham. How old they were when they had their first son, how old they were when they died. And if you look at those chapters and you add the days and the years up, you can easily figure out that the time from Adam to Abraham was about 2,000 years. 2,000 years. In that 2,000 years, the great flood of Noah happened, but from Adam to Abraham, 2,000 years. And all historians agree that Abraham, a real man, a real person, lived in the Middle East about 4,000 years ago. So if you take 2,000 years from Adam to Abraham, 4,000 years from Abraham to today, 2,000 and 4,000 is 6,000 years. That's how long ago creation occurred. But you say, Mr. John, that's not what they taught us in school. And you'd be right, they don't teach you that in school. That comes from God's Word. You see, it wasn't until the 1700s that men, scientists, theorized that the earth was a lot older. Theorized is a big word that means they guessed. They had a scientific guess based on what the best science they understood at the time was. And in the 1700s, a man named Comte de Buffon, that's hard to say, it's French, he thought the earth was 75,000 years old. 1700, 75,000 years old. Fast forward 100 years to the mid-1800s, and now there was a man named Charles Lyell who studied all the layers of the rocks, and he says, those rocks form very slowly. It must have taken millions of years. So the earth is millions of years old. Fast forward another 100 years to the 1900s, and people were able to look out in powerful telescopes to see galaxies that were literally billions of light years away. Took 1 billion years for light to travel that far. And now they guessed, they theorized that, well, the universe must be billions of years old. But isn't it interesting? It wasn't until the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s that people ever thought the Earth was older than 6,000 years. That's pretty interesting. So today, two widely different views are held as to when the Earth was created, when and how old the universe is. One version, based on God's word, says it's only 6,000 years old. Another version, based on scientific evidence, says that it must be billions of years old. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old and the universe is 14 billion years old. There's a big difference between the two, one versus the other. Well, has science really disproved the Bible? Has science made this book, well, we can't trust it? No, it hasn't. May it never be. There's not a chance that God's word will fail. And I'm going to show you some really fun, interesting, simple things that are completely consistent with a young universe, solar system, a young Earth, just so that you know that when you hear about billions of years, you don't have to question whether the Bible is true. The Bible is true, and we center our life on God's word. Most every process that we can look at to date the earth will give estimates of the age of the earth that are far, far, far younger than billions of years old or even millions of years old. The majority of them give ages that look like it's just thousands of years old. So let's look at just a couple on today's lesson, because there's a whole lot of them, and some of them are complicated to understand, but we're going to look at some that have pretty pictures that are easy to understand. Starlight, to some scientists, suggests the Earth or the solar system is billions of years old. It took billions of years to travel. But let's look at supernovas. Do you know what a supernova is? A supernova is a star that explodes. It explodes, and when it explodes, it leaves a cloud of dust and gas called a nebula. And we can see nebula in our galaxy. We can look at them through a telescope. And as a matter of fact, we can observe that about one supernova occurs every 25 years. One every 25 years. Well, if our galaxy was really billions of years old, then we should have thousands upon thousands, if not millions, of supernovas visible in the galaxy. But we don't. Do you know how many we can actually see? We see 200 in our galaxy. Well, if one every 25 years, 200 years, you multiply, that's 5,000 years. That's how old supernovas appear to tell us how old our galaxy is. But here's another one that's fun to look at. Comets. Here's a picture of Halley's Comet. Now, Halley's Comet comes around, do you remember from school? Once every 75 years. And every time it comes around the sun, it loses some of itself. As a matter of fact, up to 5% of itself can get lost every trip around the sun. So every time a comet comes back, it loses more and more of itself until pretty soon there's none left. Well, comets lose so much material that in less than 10,000 years, there would be no more comets left in our solar system. No more comets left at all. And yet we still can find comets. Well, that must mean that the whole thing is less than 10,000 years old. Just what God's word said, 6,000 years old. Here's another one. There's a picture of the moon. Did you know that the moon is receding? It's getting farther away from us. 2 inches per year. it's going away from us. 2 inches per year. Now, that's not very much. 2 inches times 6,000 years is 12,000 inches. That's not less than a mile. It's not very much. But if the moon was there 4 billion years ago, like people theorize, and it was moving away at 2 inches per year, it would be out of sight. We would see no moon. So the moon helps us understand how young the solar system is. Again, less than 10,000 years. Well, if those are the evidences that the solar system and the galaxy are young, what about evidences of the Earth is young? Because when they looked at all those rock layers in the Grand Canyon, they theorized something like this. They said, Chuck's got a picture of Grand Canyon rock layers. It says, you know, rock layers only accumulate at 1 inch per year, and so that's to be at least 63 million years to get a mile of rock layers and 125 million to get to 2 miles of rock layers that are in the Grand Canyon. But they made a big mistake. You see, rock layers don't ever form slowly. Rock layers from sediment form catastrophically. They form quickly. They form when large amounts of mud and sand are swished and swirled and sloshed all over a big area, and then it compacts into sediment and it turns into rock. But the actual catastrophe that deposited all the sediment happens very quickly. So then the scientists said, oh yes, we know that. We know that those rocks form quickly, but between this layer and this layer, there must be at least 500 million years because we know the Earth is so old. Well, what's the evidence for that? I'm going to show you 2 pictures that show that cannot be true. First picture is a picture of bent strata, and you're going to see straight strata on the top and wavy strata on the bottom. There is no way that something could form over billions of years and not be so dried out that when it would try to bend, it would crack. And yet these layers form like a ribbon. It means they all formed, the whole sequence formed quickly and then was bent and deformed quickly. So again, it suggests a young Earth. But here's a really important one. Here's what's called a polystrate fossil. It's a picture of a tree trunk that goes from the layer here all the way to the layer at the bottom. And he supposedly thought that occurred over millions of years. Well, it didn't. The tree didn't last millions of years. The tree was deposited with the sedimentary rock, again showing that all these rocks are young. They're not old. How about humans? Humans didn't change from apes to humans over 1 million years ago. You know, the whole Earth's population, 8 billion people now, could have developed from 8 people on Noah's Ark 4,500 years ago. It could have easily happened at the same birth rate we see today. 8 people to 8 billion in just 4,500 years. So those are just some simple examples that I want to leave you that show our Earth, our solar system, are not billions of years old or millions of years old. They're really consistent with God's word, which says they're only 6,000 years old. So, when what we observe in science, real science, what we observe confirms a young Earth. Now, who would you be most likely to believe? This is my last question for you today. Would you more likely believe God, who knows everything, who never lies, who has recorded the truth for us in his word? Would you rather believe him, or would you rather believe scientists who don't know everything, who often change their opinion, who sometimes lie to protect their reputation or their ideas or to gain fame? Who would you rather believe? God or scientists when they tell you when God created the earth? As for me, I'm counting on God. I'm counting on God. I'm centering my life on God's word. And it's just wonderful to see that real science, real observational science, is consistent with God's word in a 6,000-year-old earth. And that's all for today. Next week, we're going to actually go past creation and talk about Adam and Eve and some stories from Adam and Eve's life. See you next week. Bye-bye.